Jovan Buha! Buha!
Yo, I'm Jovan Buha, Lakers beat writer for The Athletic, and welcome to episode 80 of Buha's Block. On today's episode, we're going to be covering the state of the Lakers, 10 storylines at the 40-game mark. As you guys know by now, this is an ongoing series throughout the season, 10 storylines in 10-game increments. Probably will not get to all 10, might run through the last couple, but we'll do my best to cover the primary ones in as much depth as possible. But before we get started, you guys know the drill. For those watching on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. And for those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. Quickly, at the 40-game mark, the Lakers are 22-18. That is a 45-win pace. They are 6th in the West, 13th in offense, 24th in defense, and 21st in net rating. They have a minus 2.6 point differential and a minus 2.9 net rating. So those are all of the notable numbers to know entering this discussion. All right, so storyline number one for the Lakers over the past 10 games. So we're going from game 31 through game 40. Is the D'Angelo Russell / Dorian Finney-Smith trade. So the Lakers made a splash by executing a trade right before the new year on December 29th, actually in between game 31 and 32 of the season. They end up trading D'Angelo Russell, Maxwell Lewis, and 3 second-round picks to the Brooklyn Nets for Dorian Finney-Smith and Shake Milton. Dorian Finney-Smith is a guy that the Lakers have coveted for a couple of years now. They've been tied to during different portions of trade cycles, and ultimately the price had been too high for him. At one point, it was 2 first-round picks, and it eventually went down to 1. And then there was a bit of a bidding war between the Lakers and the Grizzlies, and the Grizzlies were actually willing to give up a first-round pick for Dorian Finney-Smith, but the Nets wanted a second-round pick back from the Grizzlies, and they didn't want to include that. And then the Lakers swooped in with their 3 seconds and won the DFS sweepstakes. And I was for the trade at the time, and I'm still for the trade. I think from a process perspective, it made a lot of sense. The Lakers had a bit of an imbalance within the roster in terms of having more guards than wings, being tilted a little bit more offensively than defensively. And I think DFS has come in and provided a nice two-way balance. Until last game, he had been shooting 40% on threes. After the Clippers game, it dipped to 36%, and that just shows small sample size. He's only played in 7 games, but he's shot the ball at an above-average rate. He has been relatively hit or miss offensively. If you look at the box scores, some single-digit games, then it looked like he was getting finally accustomed to playing with the group in those Atlanta, Houston, and Dallas games. Then the Lakers have to deal with the fire situation and the 2 postponements. He has the San Antonio game, then the birth of his son, misses a couple games, and then I thought looked rather rusty, at least on the offensive side, against the Clippers, and progressively looked more comfortable out there. I think DFS has come in and fit well around LeBron and AD as a seasoned vet with deep playoff experience. This is a guy that's been to the conference finals. He has fit in around a player in Luka who is about as similar as it gets to LeBron from an offensive perspective, and just knows where to be offensively, knows how to relocate, knows how to cut, knows how to move, knows how to screen, and I think just does a bunch of little things that fit well offensively, and then defensively can defend multiple positions, and I think has done a solid job switching onto bigs and battling the paint and defending them in the post. He's not afraid to commit some hard fouls, and has struggled a little bit with foul trouble, but I think the Lakers, just based on their personnel, tend to be more reactive and a little bit passive defensively. So I kind of like the physicality and the toughness and the ruggedness that DFS has brought on that end. I think can get a little overtaxed when putting him on a primary ball handler. I actually think against the Clippers, he was better against James Harden than Kawhi Leonard, interestingly enough. But in general, he has tended to do better against wings and bigger front court players rather than against the speedy, shifty, athletic guards and ball handlers, which makes sense. That's more of a task for a Max Christie or a Jared Vanderbilt once he gets back. So I think DFS has brought a look to the Lakers defense that they didn't really have, especially with Jared Vanderbilt currently out. He leads this group in plus minus. And it's not like he leads them because he missed a couple games, because actually the Lakers won those 2 games that he missed. So they had a positive point differential in those 2 games. So that really shows the contrast as to how they performed. They're just 2-5 with DFS in the lineup, but he leads the group in plus minus. And to me, he's 7th in the team in minutes over this stretch since the trade. And if anything, I think that needs to creep up to 4th or 5th, and it should probably be a battle between him and Max for that 4th or 5th spot. From a record perspective, the Lakers have been underwhelming. They are just 4-5, and looking at this 9-game stretch, they are 17th in offense, they are 26th in defense, and they are 25th in net rating. Those are all bad marks and worse than their season-long marks for the season. As I'm currently recording this, they're 13th in offense, 24th in defense, and 21st in net rating. And so now, with about 3 weeks removed from the trade, I stand by. I think that this was the correct move by the Lakers. They did not give up a first-round pick. They traded D'Lo for a 3-and-D wing to better balance the rotation. And I think the 3-and-D wing, there's been some hiccups. He's missed a couple games. There was the fires and the postponements, and I think he's still getting acclimated. But overall, he has led the group in plus minus. He has shot the ball relatively well. He has fit in defensively and brought them an element that they did not have. And again, for the price of less than a first-round pick, I think this move made a lot of sense and made this group better, especially from a playoff viability standpoint. Now, I do think DFS should be starting for Rui. I think that would make a lot more sense. The starters with DFS have performed better than the starters with Rui over this stretch, and I think it's time to move Dorian into the starting lineup, move Rui to the bench, better balance the offense-defense dynamic right now that the Lakers have between their starters and their bench. You can make a case with Max Christie's rise, their 5 best scorers right now are all starting, and the guys coming off the bench, the Gabe Vincents, the Dorian Finney-Smiths, the Jackson Hayes, the Cam Reddish before he got DNP CD'd, it's set to Siberia. Like, those guys were all defensive-minded, energy, banshee types, as JJ likes to call them. And I think if you move Rui to the bench, start DFS, you have 2 two-way guys next to LeBron, AD, and Austin. And I think it just makes more sense. However, the final part of this is that the DFS trade was always supposed to be a precursor to another move. So depending on what happens over the next 2.5 weeks, as the Lakers decide which path they want to go down and how much they're willing to invest in this group and how many picks and which players and what type of players and skill sets do they need to try to complete this roster. If the DFS trade ends up being the biggest move they made, then this group just isn't going to be good enough. And it was a nice move, and I complimented it, and I stand by basically everything I've said about it over the past 3 weeks and everything I said about it reacting in the moment. But it was always supposed to be the first move to a second move and a third move. And depending on what those second and third moves are, if those second and third moves even happen, that will determine the big picture of how we view this trade, how it fits into the puzzle of what the 2024-25 Lakers are trying to become. So again, in a vacuum, I like the value of D'Lo and not a first-round pick for DFS. I think it made them a more serious team, but the results have obviously indicated they've struggled against good teams, and I will touch on that in a later storyline. But for now, in a vacuum, I like the move. I think DFS has fit in relatively well. Again, from a box score perspective, he's not going to wow you necessarily, but from a doing the little things that lead to productive lineups and lead to winning, that has been shown in the data since he's arrived in LA. And I think they need to make a couple of tweaks with moving him into the starting lineup, making a subsequent trade or two, and this will be a more serious, balanced roster. Storyline number 2 is the trade deadline. And as of this recording, the Lakers have 18 days to decide which direction they want to go in. So let me explain a little bit further. The way I see it, the Lakers have 3 paths forward over the next 18 days. And they are coming to a crossroads with the future of the franchise and how they want to end the LeBron James, Anthony Davis era. The 3 paths forward, as I see it, are option 1, go all in, put both picks on the table, put your young assets on the table, and whatever is the best possible outcome, like you canvass the league, you talk to every team, you call about every realistic target, and whatever is the best combination of outcomes possible with the assets that you have, both between players and picks, you go all in, you go get those players, you use those assets, and you build the best supporting cast possible for this season and for next season, and you let the chips fall where they may in terms of now it's on JJ, LeBron, AD, Austin, go figure it out. We got you a Walker Kessler, we got you a Cam Johnson, we got you a Bruce Brown, we got you whoever. Go make it work. Go figure it out. That's path 1. Path 2 is stand pat or make a smaller move. You trade a second round pick. You trade maybe 2 second round picks. You go get your Jonas Valanciunas or someone of that ilk, someone that can theoretically be in a playoff rotation, but I don't think is necessarily changing your fortunes as the Lakers. And maybe it's an upgrade at one of your positional needs, but it's not really a needle mover. And you basically say, like, we traded for DFS, we traded for Valanciunas, we traded for DFS, we traded for player X, but we're drawing a clear line in the sand. We're not giving up our future firsts. We are not giving up any of our young assets, Dalton Connect, Max Christie, etc. We believe that this group, we tried to invest a little bit in it. We're trying to see if we could toe that line of being competitive and maintaining our longer term assets. And we're okay with if this is another first round and out, 7 seed, 6 seed, whatever. We at least made a couple of smaller moves to upgrade the roster, and but we're preserving the long-term health of the group. And then the third path, and I would say the least realistic by far, if not entirely off the table, is rebuilding and tearing it all down, trading LeBron and AD, holding a bidding war for those two, and just getting all the picks, all the young assets back, and just saying, this group isn't good enough. And what's the point of being the number 7 seed, losing in the first round, and going out sad with the LeBron AD era? And sure, keeping LeBron and AD, you stay relevant, you sell out tickets, you're in the conversation, and you can still point to, well, hey, in 2023, we made that conference finals run. In 2020, we won the title. We still have a puncher's chance as long as we have those 2 guys. And there is an element of truth to that sentiment, but I think clearly at this point, this roster is not good enough to truly contend. So if they want to contend, they almost have to do path 1. Path 2 isn't going to cut it, and path 3 obviously is just blowing it all up. So I don't see path 3 happening. I think it would have to take LeBron or AD asking out, and all indications so far have been that's not the case. But path 1 versus path 2, it's interesting to see which way they go. Like, technically you could do like a path 1.5 where you trade 1 pick and you kind of do an all in move, but it's not fully all in. And there's degrees of nuance, I guess, between path 1 and path 2. But really, when it comes down to it, I think this group needs some significant upgrades if they want to seriously contend for a championship. And that's where path 1 comes in terms of putting both picks on the table and just saying, we are trying to build the best roster possible over the next year and a half for LeBron and AD to go out on top or to go out with some pride and making this a competitive situation where those guys can potentially be a home court team and potentially win a round or 2 and like have a legitimate shot if things break right for them to win a title. I don't think there's any move that's going to put the Lakers on the same tier as OKC, Boston, or Cleveland, but they could get into that second tier with the New Yorks, the Milwaukees, the Dallases, the Denvers. And once you're in that tier, you at least have a shot depending on, and remember, only one of those top three are in the West. It's only OKC. So the Lakers have a shot to be the number 2 team in the West. And if they're on the other side of the bracket, could be a conference finals run. And then depending on what happens with OKC, maybe they lose or they're banged up or whatever, then you have a shot to make the finals. So it's going to be interesting to see which path they ultimately choose. If I had to make a prediction, I think they're more likely to do path 2 and either stand pat or make a small move with another second round pick or 2. But we'll see in the next 2.5 weeks which path they pick and how they ultimately view this group, because they can try to kick the can down the road again and say, hey, over the summer, there's going to be better trade options. We'll have a little bit more flexibility, but LeBron will be entering his year 23, age 41 season. And you're basically putting all of your eggs in the basket of next season, trying to compete and contend and punting on this season. So I think it's hard to legitimately say you're still going to be going for it if you don't make another move at the 2025 deadline. So we will see. They'll either go all in and show that they really believe in LeBron and AD. They will stand pat or make a small move and say they don't believe in them, or they'll just tear it all down and rebuild. Storyline number 3 is, which position or skill set do the Lakers need most? The way I view it with the Lakers is they have 3 needs. And those needs are another two-way wing and ideally just another guy who can complement LeBron, AD, and Austin on both sides of the floor, be a plus shooter and maybe have some other skills offensively, but also be a multi-positional plus defender. I think that end of the floor is a little bit more important, but comparing that player to like a Cam Reddish or Jared Vanderbilt, I think they need to be in the same stratosphere defensively, but be better offensively than those two guys. Better shooters, more reliable offensive players. So that's one need. Second need is a better backup 5, which has been really a need since 2021, as I've made the argument for on multiple occasions. But Lakers have had a revolving door of bad backup centers next to Anthony Davis for going on 4 years now. And they could certainly use an infusion of size, of length, of toughness. I would argue that player needs to be a good defensive rebounder and a good rim protector. I would also argue that some of the names that have been linked to the Lakers do not check both of those boxes. And I would say rim protection is arguably more important, but that's certainly a need, and a big need, no pun intended. And then the third need for the Lakers is another ball handler / playmaker. I think specifically a guy who can supplement LeBron and Austin when one of the two is off the floor. So I view this guy more as a bench ball handler / playmaker, but for the times that one of those two guys is off the floor, ideally this guy can be out there as a secondary or even sometimes co-lead ball handler initiator. And also if JJ continues to not stagger LeBron and Austin and have these lineups where both of them are off the floor, I think there needs to be a better ball handler, initiator, playmaker out there than a Gabe Vincent or even a Shake Milton or a Max Christie or whoever, or even AD. Like I think AD is more of a secondary guy, or you need a guy who can at least get him the ball and initiate sets. And I don't think that's Gabe Vincent with what we've seen through the first 40 games of the season. So those are the 3 needs. I would put them in the order that I just laid them out. I would say another two-way wing is the biggest need. And the reason I say that is because if you look at the construction of this roster, it starts with AD, LeBron, and Austin, and then it goes from there. And I just look at it as who are the types of guys that would fit really well next to AD, LeBron, and Austin. And if we loosely put them at their projected positions, it's Austin at point guard, LeBron at the 4, and AD at the 5. And if you're thinking about what's my closing lineup, what's my starting lineup, what's my best 5? If it's Game 7 against Denver, it's Game 7 against OKC, it's Game 7 against Boston, it's Game 7 against Cleveland, whatever's the circumstance, it's a play-in game. It's the regular season finale game to determine seeding. What is my lineup? What is my 5-man combination if I'm the Lakers? And right now I think they have 3 locks, Austin, LeBron, and AD. And I think the other 2 spots are wide open. And based on the way the season has gone, I think it would probably be Max Christie and Rui based on the way that JJ views this group. But Gabe Vincent has closed some games. He closed the Clippers game when Austin got pulled after begging knees. Gabe Vincent closed over Max. We've seen DFS close over Rui for stretches since the trade. So they do have some optionality there. But I think adding another two-way wing, like if we're thinking about that 2 and 3 spot specifically as to like the guys that complement those 3 starters, offensive hubs, closing options, you want two-way guys around them. And so that to me is like, sure, like there's some exceptions, maybe a Walker Kessler, a Miles Turner, where you go get that guy, you're investing a lot of first round draft capital and you're just changing the way you play. You're probably starting that guy. They're playing like 28, 30, 32 plus minutes a night. And they're part of the closing lineup in most cases. And you're changing how LeBron plays. You're changing how AD plays. You're changing the dynamic of your roster. But outside of that, and I think right now those types of deals are unlikely. If it's really just about like who best complements the Lakers' 3 best players, who can fit into a closing lineup, who can fit into a starting lineup, who can fit into a best 5 in a serious, important game, I think it's two-way wings that are the types of guys to slot there. And that's why I think that is the biggest need. Because right now, I don't think Gabe should be closing serious games for this team. I think it comes down to a combination of Max, DFS, and Rui. Perhaps Vando, when healthy and when he returns, can enter that mix as well, though he, of course, has some offensive limitations. So, like, I think you can never have enough two-way wings, and I think the Lakers need one more guy, a guy who's better than Dalton, who's better than Cam, a guy who is better offensively than Vando, a guy who's better defensively than Rui. And if they can find that guy and bring them into the fold, I think that would go a long way in terms of just optionality, versatility, and figuring out the best starting and closing lineups, the best, I keep saying serious lineups against the top teams in the league. So I think that's the biggest need. Need number 2 to me then is the backup 5. We've seen AD misses the game against the Nets. The Lakers get killed in points in the paint, points at the rim, offensive rebounds, second chance points. Jackson Hayes cannot hold down the fort. He is not a good rim protector. He actually rebounded the ball fairly well that game, but in general, he is not a good defensive rebounder. He is not a good rim protector. Christian Wood, there's been no updates on lately. No clue when or if he's coming back. And then Christian Koloko is clearly behind Jackson in the pecking order. Trey Jemison, their new two-way guy, is a brick wall, but a brick wall with some limited mobility and skill overall. So I don't see any of those guys being the solution here. And you could try to problem solve by committee and plugging and playing several of those guys next to AD or just as the backup 5. But to me, they need to go get a better backup 5. And that is certainly a need for this group. And the last one is less of a need because I do think between LeBron, Austin, and AD, they should be fine offensively in terms of shot creation and all that stuff. They are susceptible to turnovers, so that's an area where this potential player could help. But I do view that player as more of a backup guy and really more of like a Gabe replacement, a guy who's a little bit sturdier offensively, can run the offense, and you probably take a hit defensively. It's doubtful you find a guy as good as Gabe defensively, but I think the playmaking is probably more of a need than Gabe's defense with like the second unit. So those are, in my opinion, and talking to people around the league, talking to people around the Lakers, like those are the 3 general positional needs that this group has. That's the order I would rank them. But you can make an argument in either direction. I know there are a lot, like for fans, I would assume it's probably the backup center spot. That's been something that we've been hearing since the offseason. Really, we've been hearing for years from the fan base. I think more recently, playmaking has been a bigger need that has grown in importance without D'Lo and without having that like third reliable ball handler playmaker. But I still contend that when we're talking about like who are the guys that are going to be out on the floor with 5 minutes left in a game 7, 5 minutes left in a play-in game, 5 minutes left in game 82, Lakers are playing for the 5 seed or the 6 seed. It's going to be 2 wings out there. And I think they still need to find a better upgrade to be in that conversation and potentially be closing. Storyline number 4 is the Lakers' struggles against good teams. And now that we're at the midway point of the season, this feels like something that is a little bit stickier, because this had been a trend all season for the Lakers, obviously leading up to this point. But it's one thing at the 10-game mark, it's one thing at the 20-game mark, it's one thing at the 30-game mark. But now that we're at the 40-game mark, we have a half-season sample size of the Lakers really struggle against good teams. So they are 11-17 against teams 500 or better, which is the worst mark of the 10 teams in the Western Conference playoffs / play-in. So among the top 10 teams in the conference, Lakers are currently 6th. They have the worst record against teams 500 or better. And that is a concerning mark. That is an indicator that if they get into the play-in or the playoff mix, that they have not fared well against those types of teams. And more specifically, they are 2-7 against teams with a better record than them. So if you look at the top 5 teams in the West, and the only team with a better record than them in the East that they've faced so far is Cleveland, who they're 0-2 against. They are 2-7 against those teams. And 2 of those wins have come against Memphis. And one of those wins was with Ja Morant and Desmond Bane out of the lineup. So if you really look at it from a, like, those teams are semi-healthy. And Memphis did beat the Lakers without Anthony Davis. So that is you could take away a Memphis win and a Memphis loss, and then the Lakers would be 1-6 against those teams and under more normal circumstances. But that is concerning, because if the Lakers are going to be a 6 seed, they're going to have to win at least 1, if not 2, if not 3, if not 4 series on the road to win a championship. But the fact that they have struggled against teams above 500, the fact that they have struggled against teams with a better record than them, and the fact that they have struggled on the road, they have the worst road record among those top 10 teams, and actually one of the best home records. But again, if they don't have home court advantage, it doesn't really matter. Like, they might win their home games in a series, but they got to go out on the road and steal a game or two. Like, those things are all troubling. And that's to say nothing of their net rating, which has been negative and is the worst among the top 10. Their point differential, which is also negative, worst among the top 10. So there are a lot of troubling signs that suggest that this group is not as good as their record. And looking at their projected record, which right now, over the course of an 82-game season, that would extrapolate out to a 45-win pace, per Cleaning the Glass, they're actually on pace to win 36 games based on their net differential. So that's a 9-win difference in terms of their performance on the floor versus their actual performance in the standings. And that's alarming. That's troubling. That's concerning. So again, outside of their record, everything is a bit of a red flag in terms of the net rating, the point differential, the road record, the record against teams above 500, the record against teams with a better record than them. All those things are negative. And if the Lakers ultimately decide to do path 2 or path 3, and either stand pat or make a small move or just tear it all down, this would be the reason. They're 11-1 against teams under 500, and they've dominated those teams, but they've also had several close wins in those games. And their record actually in games decided by double figures or more is just 6-12. So that shows you they have very few blowouts and have been blown out several times. And we can think Denver and Phoenix and Minnesota and Miami and Dallas and San Antonio. And like there's all these games where they've just been shellacked in, the Clippers, where they're either shellacked in the first half and it's just basically a blowout wire to wire, or it's close in the first half and they get shellacked in the third quarter. And then it's a romp from that point on and they roll over. So not to be an alarmist, and I know I just data dumped a lot of alarming stats, but like there's a lot with their statistical profile that suggests this is an average to below average team rather than like a dark horse contender or a sneakily good team with like some bad luck. It's actually been the opposite. They've looked like a below average team who has been fortunate to overachieve and to win more games than they should have. The thing I'm most discouraged by up to this point in the season has been their record against teams above 500, because it's kind of felt like if they're playing a team that's better than them, they don't really have a shot. And for a team that's looking like they're probably going to be a 5, 6, 7 seed as constructed, and maybe even lower. If the floor falls out, that's just like, you don't really have a shot then, right? So you kind of have to be able to beat those teams. And so far, they haven't been able to do that. Storyline number 5 is the emergence of Austin Reaves as a legitimate number 3 option. So I'm going to read you Austin Reaves' numbers over the past 10 games, 9 of which have been post D'Lo DFS trade. So over the past 10 games, Austin Reaves is averaging 37 minutes a game. So he's playing a lot, but he's averaging 21 points per game, 8.2 assists per game, 4.5 rebounds per game, 1.1 steals per game. And he's doing so with 46.3, 41.3, and 87.3 shooting splits. So that's 46% from the floor, 41% on threes, and 87% from the free throw line. Those are all great numbers, especially for a higher usage playmaker, shot creator. So like he's just been playing really well, and there has been some inconsistency in there. I thought the Clippers game was a little shaky. He obviously had the Texas stretch, especially the Dallas game where he was targeted defensively, even the San Antonio game, some of the turnovers. Like he has been relatively up and down, but the highs have been very high, and really the highest we've seen from Austin during his time in the NBA. And I think overall, he has done much more positive than negative. He is second on the team in plus minus over that stretch, only behind DFS. And I think it's been reflected in the way that he has dominated the offense, the way that he has really excelled as a playmaker, as a shot creator, getting downhill, getting to the free throw line, getting to the rim, hitting his pull-up shots, hitting his step backs, fadeaways, running two-man game with LeBron, with AD, with whoever, and really excelling. And the Lakers have also ran some off-ball action, some wide pin downs, and he's just a really smart player. I thought, like looking at the Miami game, he was a big part of dissecting their zone in LA, making that second half comeback. He had 14 assists and just 1 turnover, and that was coming off of a really rough stretch against the Texas teams. And I think one thing with Austin is like he's been very transparent and very self-aware about this process and his growth as a player. And he has said he's going through growing pains. He is adjusting and learning on the fly to this new role as the clear-cut number 3. The one thing is, like, I think with the increased offensive role, it I think has come at the expense of his defense to an extent. And that's something that the Lakers need to try to figure out. But that's also why I would point to Dorian Finney-Smith making more sense as the 5th starter over Rui to help Austin defensively, to give them another better perimeter defender out there. And I think that the combination of Austin, Rui, and LeBron has been a bit problematic defensively for the Lakers. You put DFS in there, I think that shores that up a little bit. You have Max in DFS and AD. You have more positive defenders than negative defenders, and I think it just looks better on both sides of the ball. So I think there are ways the Lakers could help Austin. I also think Austin can be better in general and more consistent. I just would also point to, it's hard to ask someone to take on more offensive responsibility and maintain their prior level of defense. That's just how it works. There are very few guys who can be clear positives on both sides of the ball. And I think Austin's defense has slipped because the offense of usage and role and responsibility has increased. But he's a guy in a team scheme. He rotates well. He boxes out. He's one of their better rebounders despite being 6'5", and he's constantly thinking the game defensively and trying to make the right play. And are there physical limitations? Yes. Are there teams and players and schemes that can take advantage of him and target him? Yes. Is that something that the Lakers need to do a better job of countering with? Either scram switching or getting him off of that primary matchup, or zoning up the backside and doing a better job helping, or just getting more creative with how they counter that. Yes, I think the Dallas game was a perfect example of Dallas found a way to target him. They continued to target him, and the Lakers did a really poor job of countering that. But overall, the way that he has been shooting and scoring the ball, the way that he has been facilitating, he's really stepped up as a playmaker and as a lead ball handler. And again, he has owned that he is learning and growing and adjusting, and it hasn't been a seamless process. So I think he continues to impress as a legitimate number 3. Just like he's been better this 10-game stretch than he was the previous 10-game stretch as the Lakers were starting to groom him for that role. I think he'll be better game 50, game 60, game 70, game 80, and just continue to grow and excel in this role. So I think that's been arguably the biggest positive development throughout this past 10 games, aside from the DFS trade and balancing out the roster. Austin's growth as a number 3 guy and really as the number 2 ball handler, playmaker, facilitator. Storyline number 6 is LeBron James, the 40-year-old sniper. And from a big picture perspective, we know that LeBron has improved as a three-point shooter throughout the course of his career, especially in the later stages of his career. Last year shot a career high 41% on threes, and he's progressively become a better three-point shooter, a higher volume three-point shooter, and sometimes those things don't go hand in hand. But as he has evolved and adapted as an on-ball shot creator and playmaker, and just an offensive weapon, one of the things he has added later in his career has been a very reliable three-point shot. But coming off of a December month in which he shot under 32% on threes, LeBron turns 40 at the end of the month, and since then is shooting 52.8% on threes, which is an absurd figure. And no, it's not sustainable, but it's been a hell of a weapon for the Lakers during this stretch. And it's really bailed them out. I think of the Portland game. I think of the Miami game. I think of the Brooklyn game. Like LeBron's clutch shot making and just taking over these games in the fourth quarter with jumpers. And I know I specifically mentioned the three-point shooting because that 52.8% number is just crazy. But looking at the different categories of his shooting, he's shooting 52% on catch and shoot threes, 53.6% on pull-up threes, and with 2-point field goals, he is shooting 100% on 2-point catch and shoot jumpers, which he's had some of those like along the baseline where he catches it 16, 18 feet and just rises up, 41.2% on pull-ups from 2-point range, and then 68% within 10 feet of the basket, which is a really good mark. He's just been shooting the ball at an incredible level. And as the Lakers have kind of regressed on both sides of the ball, LeBron's reliable shot making has been something that they have been able to rely on. And again, it's not going to continue at this level, but if he can be back to basically the level of last season at being like a low 40s three-point shooter, given the types of shots he can create in close games and just the way that he has shot the ball over the past year plus. And he's actually been finishing better during this stretch, 77.5% in the restricted area, 54.5% on mid-range jumpers. So he's just been hot from all parts of the floor. And again, I'm not saying that this is going to continue necessarily the rest of the season, but he has gotten into a certain offensive rhythm that you combine that with the way that Austin's playing. And if they can reduce the turnovers and get the rest of the team to shoot a little better, a little bit more in line with their career numbers. Offensively, I think the Lakers will be fine longer term. Again, I think it's just about finding the right defensive pieces to complement those guys, and ideally guys who can hit open shots and just space the floor around LeBron, AD, and Austin. The seventh and final storyline, I will rattle off the final three after this one, but this is going to be the last one I go in depth on, is two big lineups. And this was something that JJ Redick recently talked about wanting to use more of, wanting to see more two big lineups now that Jackson Hayes was back in the fold. And he did it against Miami, and the Lakers went on a little bit of a run to close the third quarter there. He also did it against the Clippers, and they went on a larger 13-2 run. It wasn't fully the two big look during that stretch, but they threw in some zone, and they're being a bit more aggressive and scrambling with that group. And that group specifically, I really liked. It was AD, Jackson Hayes, LeBron James, Dalton Knecht, and Gabe Vincent. And I think that configuration makes a lot more sense than one they used earlier in the game which I believe was AD, Jackson, DFS, Max, and Gabe. I think in that configuration, you don't have enough offense and enough playmaking and ball handling. In the second one, you have a much better balance. You have Jackson and AD, you have LeBron as your primary shot creator, ball handler, playmaker, and then you have a couple of guys spacing the floor in Gabe and Dalton, and you also have a little bit of two-way balance there as Gabe is a plus defender, Dalton is a guy you're hiding, but you can kind of get away with it because you have two 7-footers out there, LeBron at the 3, Gabe also out there. So you're putting guys, you're slotting them appropriately defensively. So that group made a lot of sense. The first one did not, but we've seen some progress and some real growth with these groups. And I think it is something that the Lakers should lean more into. We saw it going back to last season. Playing Jackson Hayes or Christian Wood next to AD typically yielded good results. LA just playing bigger front courts in general. And I think when Vando is healthy, and if Christian Wood ever gets healthy, it should be the 3 front court players on the floor should be some combination of DFS, Rui, Vando, LeBron, AD, Jackson, and Christian. Those 7 guys should make up the 3 front court spots. There should be no Austin in there as a front court guy, Max in there, Cam, Dalton. Play those guys in the backcourt, play big lineups, and make up for your athletic defensive deficiencies by being bigger, because you can make up for some of your athleticism and quickness deficiencies with size and with length, but you can't be unathletic and small. And the Lakers have tended to be both small and unathletic. So I like them leading into bigger lineups. I think it makes sense. It's still a relatively low sample size, so I don't want to quote some of the lineup data until we can look at it over a longer period. But from the spurts of it we've seen, I think there's been some positives. Now, ideally, Jackson Hayes is not the second big, and this is where, going back to the Lakers' needs, I think they could use a better backup 5 and a better guy who could play next to AD. But maybe this is a test run to see, what does a Walker Kessler look like next to AD? What does a Robert Williams look like next to AD? What does a Jonas Valanciunas or a Nikola Vucevic? What do those guys look like next to Anthony Davis? And if the Lakers can continue to experiment and tinker and test this out over the next couple of weeks, and they could stumble on some combinations that they like, perhaps they go out and get that guy, and it could be not quite a seamless fit, because I think there will always be some spacing and some clunkiness, but a better fit, and kind of have a foundation and some reps and experience with maybe the other 4 guys in the lineup. And then you got to acclimate and get that 5th guy to adjust and learn the game plan, learn the playbook, all that stuff. But I've enjoyed it. I think it makes more sense. This is a group that has struggled defensively. This is a group that has struggled with the defensive glass. And by playing bigger, I think you're going to see better results. And JJ admitted as much, that he felt the defense was performing at a certain level. It's recently slipped. So he feels like going bigger will help with the defensive glass, will help with the rim protection, help with the defense overall. They've been throwing in some zone looks. I think they still have a ways to go with that. But I think that there's a lot to like about the 2 big lineups. Ideally, they have better big men next to AD. That's like the one gripe with it. But that, to me, has been a positive development. And I think longer term, this group should trend in a direction where they play more 2 big lineups. The final 3 storylines over the past 10 games. One, quickly, they added Trey Jemison. They cut Quincy Oliveri. So they have gone with 3 bigs in their 2-way spots. Clearly are trying to find a solve to the backup center position. I don't think it's going to come from the 2-way guys. I don't think it's going to come from anyone on the roster. I do think that is an external need that they are going to have to address on the trade market. Jemison, we've only seen him in 1 game. As I've said, he's a brick wall. He's made of stone. He fouls a lot. He sets hard screens. He's really physical. Blocked a couple shots. I think there are some things defensively I like about him, but offensively, he is rather raw and relatively limited. Next thing is the back end of the rotation has just really become unreliable. But I mean, Cam Reddish, as I mentioned earlier, has been banished out of the rotation, DNP, CD in 3 straight games since the San Antonio game. Dalton has been very up and down and is just unreliable and not a guy you can trust for, I don't think he should be in the playoff rotation if the playoffs are starting now. Jackson, as I've mentioned, I think has been pretty underwhelming since coming back from his injury, and has had a couple of nice stretches, a couple of nice games, but for the most part, I think has been underperforming as the backup 5. And then beyond that, it's like Shake Milton has really struggled in his limited minutes, and those lineups have been bad. Then JHS is still injured, Vando's injured, Christian Wood's injured, Bronny's largely been in the G League. So the back half of the Lakers roster has been really rough. This was something that I was talking about all offseason and saying that they needed to improve this part. And some of it has obviously been affected by injuries to Vando and Christian Wood, and I guess to a lesser extent JHS. But I think even if those guys were healthy, they would still have some of these depth issues with the back half of this roster. And that's something that if they could do some trades and dump some of these guys and go and sign better players, I think that would really help. Because right now, I think once you get to like spot 8 or 9 in the rotation, it's guys that should not be playing for a team with championship or even high level playoff aspirations the way that the Lakers have. So I think that is a big point of concern for them as they try to, again, build the best roster possible. And then final thing is switching, and that's been a big topic over the last couple of weeks. Lakers switching, especially in the Texas games, they were targeted down the stretch. Austin, of course, but even Rui and Dalton, Max, Gabe, like teams have been able to target the Lakers' weaker defenders. And when they're switching everything, or even switching 1 through 4, I think the Lakers have done a poor job of helping in those situations, of countering in those situations, and allowed teams to exploit them in the same way. So I think that's another thing that JJ's talked about, switching a little bit less, and they've gone back to their base coverage, which is 1 through 4. I've argued, as I did on a recent episode with Kobe Price of the Southern California News Group, that I think the Lakers really need to be more selective in terms of, I want Austin switching only with guards. I want Max switching 1 through 3. I want guys like Dorian, Vando, AD, LeBron, Rui. They could switch across multiple positions. I think like the front court guys can probably switch 3 to 5, but the backcourt guys, Gabe and Austin, I want switching only with guards. Dalton, I really want to be selective with who I'm switching him with. And I think the Lakers need to bake in the limitations of their personnel better and not over simplify it and just say, hey, switch 1 through 4, because I think they have too many undersized perimeter guys who are not good defensive rebounders. And when they get switched onto bigger players, they give up offensive rebounds, they give up second chance points, or they get into foul trouble. So I think being more selective with the switching is a big thing moving forward. I don't know if they're actually going to take my advice and do that. We'll see. They did stop the 1 through 5 switching, which got AD away from the basket. But I would even argue the 1 through 4 switching is still switching a little bit too much with some of these smaller guys and putting them in tough positions to box out and battle bigger guys. But that will do it for today's episode. Thank you all so much for watching and listening. For those on YouTube, please be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on channel notifications, and like and comment on this video. For those listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your podcast platform of choice, please be sure to follow, download, and leave a 5-star review. I'll be back on Tuesday after the Lakers-Wizards game. I will talk to you then.